Hello and welcome back to episode 14, and this is a slight diversion into lighting, mainly as a result of an email that I got yesterday over the weekend. So the question was about the lighting that I'm using here. It's actually been done specifically for these videos, but it's using the equipment that we use in this space for other video products, which are usually nowhere near as exciting as perhaps talking about sound and lighting equipment. But essentially, I've got a camera here in front of me here, which I use for a close-up on me. I've got one which is on the slightly wider shot, which is the one over here. Occasionally, we will use the one that's over here. And for very, very occasional use, I've actually got one that's up in the air. I don't use it very much because it has a habit of responding pretty badly to things like the keyboards, and it tends to, the white colour of these keys here blows the picture out, and it's right up in the air. And although I could dial in some compensation for that, it needs me to get a stepladder out because it's actually clamped to the lighting grid. So it doesn't get done very often, but I figured I'd put it in for this. Now, to talk about lighting, before I show you what we're using here, just need to explain a few things. Most people who have been introduced to lighting from college courses or in the old days books will be told that for video it's always 3-point lighting. For those people introduced to lighting from perhaps a theatre background, a stage background, then they don't do 3-point lighting. They tend to actually have a completely different system because the audience view the stage in a sort of perpetual long shot. So there's no such thing as a close-up. So depending on where you are sitting in the audience, you've got to be able to see people's faces, which means that if you put a light over there, you've also got to put a light over there. If you don't, half of people's faces are in shadow. So stage lighting tends to be symmetrical down the middle. So whatever you put on one side, you put on the other. And if you're brought up in America, there was a guy years ago called McCandless who sort of picked two 45-degree angles pointing at a stage, and he liked to put different colours. So you'd have a slight colour shift towards one side and the other side. In stage lighting, we tend to use anything we like apart from white light. So white light is sort of, it's not the enemy, but it's considered to be a bit boring and bland. So we'll have cool colours, which are the blues and the bluey greens, and then we've got warm colours, which are the reds and the pinks and things like that. So famous theatrical stage lighting colours might be things like lilacs and pinks. We would hate those for video. We spend ages making sure that the exact version of white is in all the lights. Video people get very upset about lights that don't conform to the usual Kelvin colour scale. So we'll have 5600K as a sort of light. That's our bluey, daylighty colour white. And then if we move down to the old-fashioned tungsten colours, the white then is actually quite orangey, and it's 3200, maybe even 3000K. So a very orangey white. And then when we go back to the LEDs that we're all using now, most of those are on 5.6. And in actual fact, the vast majority of the lights that you're seeing me on in all these videos are LEDs, and they're 5.6. I don't use any old-fashioned incandescent lights anymore. I thought I'd hang on to them, and I was quite convinced that I would never change, and gradually it's crept in, and so I'm 100% LED now. So what are we doing in here? We're not doing the theatrical thing with a symmetrical line down the middle, mainly because we've got more than one camera. So as I look at you on this one and I look at you on that one, I'm turning my head. So we've got to compensate for that by where the lights are. So 3-point lighting for video revolves around a key light, which is often talked about as representing, say, the sun. The key light produces hard shadows. And then to fill the hard shadows in, we use some kind of soft light. Now, years before, we would have a key light for video, and almost certainly it would have a stepped Fresnel lens, a bit like the ones you see on the front of lighthouses. I'm sure you know the ones I mean. So we'd have a Fresnel light as our key. That would hit noses, eye sockets, chins, the bits that stick out, and it would create shadows. The shadows are very important because that's what gives us the clue as to whether someone's nose pokes out of your face or into your face. So shadows are really, really important. But video cameras are not very good with shadows, so we need to soften those up a bit so that we can see the shadow, but we can still see detail in the shadow. That's the key feature there. What I've done in here for these sequence of videos is to create hard light, medium soft light, and very soft light. So what I've got with the two cameras here is a key light just to my left of the main camera. So it's up here. And that's actually quite a hard light, and it's creating a shadow on that side of my nose. Just up here, I've got a Fresnel lensed LED, which is managing to cover in some of those shadows. And I found that on this camera, this side of my face was too dark. So I've got yet another, but even softer and dimmer light up there. So I've actually got a spectrum of brightnesses going from hard and bright, softer, medium bright, and a dim one up here. Those amongst you who've noticed will also spot there's a light coming from the back. So I've actually got another light source which is up behind me. So in our typical college library book style, this is how you do lighting system. I've got a key, I've got a soft light to fill in the shadows, and I've got a light behind me. Now, that's what I'm using in here, and that's my take on the 3-point lighting. But I've also introduced some other light sources simply to give me a little bit extra coverage. That side of my face is still quite dim, but I quite like the way it looks on camera, so I can live with that. So that's sort of how I'm getting this balance. Now, all of these light sources are squished down. The vast majority of their light covers from the left-hand edge of this keyboard to the right-hand edge of the keyboard, covers just above my head, and only covers down to probably about my knees. The rest of the room is in darkness. Now, video cameras, as we said, are not particularly great in low light. There is actually a guitar behind me. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. It's very, very dark. And a lot of that will depend on your monitor at home. It's right at the fringes of sort of the low level capability of these cameras in darkness. They're quite happy with bright light. Once it starts to get dim, it drops off quite nicely. So I've got black drapes and I've got a black guitar. Today I've deliberately worn a dark top. So the idea is to create areas where there is nothing. There's no light, and where there is a little bit of light, it's landing on things that are actually made out of black material. So that's how I'm achieving the lighting for our studio shots here. Giving the game away. 1, 2, 3, 4 lights. One of the lights I'm using is actually repurposed. Years ago, we used to use things called redheads and blondes. The Redheads were small red lamps that had 4 barn doors to control how far the beam spread, and they used an 800 watt tubular lamp, and we could use them on location, we could use them in the studio. They were incredibly hot, but they were blindingly bright. And Redheads were pretty standard. You would buy a kit of them, probably 2 or 3 in a kit, and you could do your 3-point lighting with them, because you could open the barn doors up and you could put a sheet of diffuser between 2 of the barn doors and peg it on, and that became your soft light. And on the other side, you just use them with the open face towards the person you were shooting, and that would give you your hard light. Now, for circumstances where the 800 watts was not bright enough, there was another similar one, which is called a blonde, and that was a 2000 watt lamp, just a bigger version of the Redheads, and they were excruciatingly bright if you used them close, and they were really great heaters in the winter. Now, I've still got those because I don't throw things away. I discovered that I could get an LED lamp the same size as the old-fashioned 2000 watt tubular lamp. Nowhere near as bright, of course, and I bought one, and I've stuck it in the old blonde that I've got as my fill-in light. Has got an LED lamp unit in an old-fashioned 2K blonde. It's also a 3200K LED, so it's a warmer light. So I've got pretty much the cold light from the others, but I've deliberately got the slightly warmer one, which is what's lighting that side of my face. So it's a little bit of a colour contrast. If you do try to replace old-fashioned lamps with LED units, they're not particularly successful. That thing, I mean, they come in 650, 1K, 1.2K versions, all pretty similar housings, and you stick in a big lamp and you get really nice light out of them. Many years ago I started to use those type of lights for stage lighting, because I discovered they actually blend with other ones very nicely. So as people would move about and walk out of one light and appear in the next one, you could get a pretty seamless transition. So I quite like those. Those Fresnel lenses do a really great job at giving you nice soft edges to the beam. So I use those. But when you replace the old-fashioned filament type bulb with a modern LED version, it doesn't do the same things. You can't just put one of those into a unit and expect to get the same quality of light. That certainly doesn't happen. The light that we're using over here has an LED cob source, chip on board, but a cluster of LEDs in as small a space as it can get. You can't cram too many in because they overheat, so there is a limit to how bright a cob chip can be and still be reliable. The 50,000 hours they always quote on LEDs, I mean, you just don't get anywhere near that. I've never managed to get one to last more than a few years so far. But these cob type lamps in a Fresnel lens, you can move them backwards and forwards, but the range of beam adjustment isn't as great, and certainly at the edges it goes from bright to dark in a very quick and coarse way, so they don't blend very well with neighbours. So you have to be a little bit careful. You can get better shaping using the barn doors than you can by changing the beam angle and panning and tilting, which is a bit of a shame. The barn doors are just a little bit further away from the light source, so their control is better. So you wouldn't really want to use those without barn doors. There are also micro lens versions of Fresnel lens. Years ago in schools, we used to use overhead projectors, and they had a ground glass screen, and most of them had a micro lens Fresnel lens. They used them to try and give nice crisp images when they projected things on the screen from the transparencies. And a lot of those micro Fresnel lenses are put into the smaller video lights. And again, they do soften it up a little bit. They obviously act as a lens, but they don't give you that characteristic nice softness that a real old-fashioned glass Fresnel lens will. So you've got plenty of options with video lighting now, and certainly the benefits in terms of not getting overheated, energy costs and things like that are considerable. When we first started using the studio and we didn't have the LEDs, we had in the region of 14,000 watts of old-fashioned get hot bulbs in our lighting. The studios were incredibly hot. There's no way we could get rid of that sort of heat in this particular building. This end where we are, it's not possible to get ducts through. So we used to just get hot and hot and hot and hot, and it was horrible to work in. It was great in the winter, but not so good in the summer. So LED is the future. It's here with us. They are gradually getting better. We're now getting brighter, but in real terms, there's no actual need to get brighter. The actual brightness level in this studio is quite modest. It means people don't squint when they look at the cameras, and we can do an awful lot with this type of light. What I'm just quickly going to do is put some soft lights on. Some of the things we do in this studio involve chroma key, and chroma key, of course, requires even, bright, white light that doesn't cast shadows from the people who are actually in front of the green screens. So I've actually got a green floor, and some of the cloths that go around are green, and for that we want even, soft light. So I've got another array of TV type lights that use LED panels. If you wanted to see what all of the LED panel lights that we use for the chroma key look like when you just do a talking head, you're now seeing it. I don't think it's particularly nice to look at. It's very, very hard, and it's very even, and there's hardly any shadows whatsoever. If I wave my finger in front of my hand, you can see now that it's not casting any shadows. So LED panels are bright, they're completely soft, they're great for having no shadows, but they're completely and utterly lifeless. I don't like it at all. For some things it's perfectly acceptable to have lighting like this, but I do think that if you're going to do things that have a little bit of contrast in them, it looks so much better. Here, everything is bright. It's like making a video in a car workshop. It's incredibly bland and boring. Anyway, that's my humble view on the subject of LED panel lightings. Great for some things, absolutely rubbish for others. So I figured the next thing to do is to turn on all the working light without the TV type lights so that you can see the difference. So, okay, we're back on this time, but now we've got the working lights on. So in actual fact, in this studio here, our working lights are just fluorescent tubes on the ceiling. So there's a couple of fittings. So you're seeing me now with the working light. It reveals all sorts of things in the background. You can see things that I don't really think are visually very nice. You can certainly see the guitar. You can also see the creases in the curtains, because I didn't pay any attention whatsoever to actually dressing all the drapes properly. I just hung a set of black drapes up, and you can now see that it's full of creases. There's things in the corners that are just a bit of a mess. You can even see all the junk that I've got sitting here on this top of this desk. I'll show you a couple of the sort of the TV style LED panels that might give you a bit better indication of the other types of lights that we've got in here. For chroma key and things that we need even white light for, I tend to use LED panels like this one. Now with this, if I slide out the piece of diffuser, you can actually see this panel features rows and rows of LEDs, and then there's a slide-in piece of diffuser to make it even softer. This particular one, not even very expensive. Features controls on the back so you can adjust the colour temperature, and this particular one will also work on a battery, so I can stick a V-lock battery on it and I can take them out and about and we can use them on battery power, which is quite handy. I did mention about old-fashioned soft lights. Now this is the type of lens that I was talking about. Now that's the type of lens that up until a few years ago we'd have seen on all video lights. We'd have also seen these type of lenses on theatrical lights. The Fresnel lens with those concentric circles can produce really nice light. Now this is one of the ones where things change a little bit. If you use that light on a stage, a Fresnel would be considered a soft light. If you use that light in a video scenario, that light's considered a hard key. So there we go, a quick skim through of how we do the lighting here in our studio. I hope it's been useful. If it has, click on the subscribe button, and other than that, we'll see you on the next video. Take care.